The click of the latch on my bedroom door was a sound so ordinary, so woven into the fabric of my daily routine, that I never truly heard it. But on that Tuesday afternoon, a day that began with bland predictability and ended with my understanding of reality permanently altered, I heard it with a clarity that was almost painful. It was the sound of my world, my safe, curated, and somewhat lonely world, being unlocked from the outside. My name is Chloe. I'm 24, an aspiring graphic designer paying too much for a one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that was supposedly up and coming. That Tuesday, I'd just gotten home from a frustrating shift at the cafe where I work to pay the bills. The air in my apartment was still and cool, smelling faintly of lavender from a plug-in diffuser my mom had given me. I remember the light was that particular shade of late afternoon gold, the kind that makes everything look cinematic and soft, pouring through my west-facing window and illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I was shedding the scent of coffee grounds and steamed milk, pulling my work t-shirt over my head. I'd just tossed it onto the ever-growing pile of, maybe clean, clothes on my reading chair and was reaching for a soft, worn-in sweatshirt from my dresser drawer. My back was to the door. That's a detail that still haunts me. My back was to the door. The click wasn't loud. It was a soft, metallic snick. But in the quiet of the apartment, it was as sharp as a gunshot. My heart didn't just skip a beat, it seemed to freeze solid in my chest, a cold, heavy stone. My breath caught in my throat. Every instinct, every primal nerve ending, screamed a single, silent word: intruder. Time didn't slow down, it shattered. My mind raced through a frantic inventory of possibilities. I lived alone. My landlord, Mr. Henderson, was a man in his 70s who always gave at least 24 hours notice for any visit, and always with a formal, typed letter slipped under the door. My friend, Sarah, had a key, but she was in meetings across town until 6. There was no one else. I spun around, my arms instinctively crossing over my chest, my body coiling into a defensive crouch. The sweatshirt slipped from my numb fingers and pooled on the floor at my feet. And there he was. A man stood in my doorway. He wasn't what I expected. There was no ski mask, no menacing posture, no glint of a weapon. He was just a man. He looked to be in his late 50s or early 60s, with a kind, almost gentle face, framed by a neat cap of silver gray hair. He was dressed in clean, pressed khaki pants and a light blue polo shirt, the kind a friendly golf dad would wear. He looked more like a retired accountant than a home invader. But his eyes, that's what I locked onto. They were warm, startlingly blue, and they were wide with an emotion I couldn't immediately place. Not anger, not threat. It was something else, something like profound, overwhelming shock. We stood there, frozen in a tableau of mutual, breathless astonishment. The golden light from the window caught the dust motes around him, making him seem almost ethereal, like an apparition. The only sound was the frantic, wild thumping of my own heart against my ribs. I was paralyzed, a statue of fear and vulnerability. He was the first to move, to speak. His mouth opened, then closed. He lifted a hand, not in a threatening gesture, but almost as if to ward off a blow, or to reassure. I'm so sorry, he stammered. His voice was soft, husky with emotion. I didn't mean to, I have the wrong apartment. It was the classic line. The line you see in movies, the line every self-defense article tells you not to believe. My fear, momentarily suspended by his bizarrely non-threatening appearance, came roaring back, colder and sharper than before. My eyes darted to the nightstand, where my phone was charging. It felt a mile away. Get out, I managed to choke out. My voice was a thin, reedy whisper, nothing like the commanding shout I had intended. Get out right now or I'll scream. But he didn't move, he didn't run, he just stood there, his blue eyes fixed on me, and they were now glistening with unshed tears. This was wrong. All of it was wrong. A burglar doesn't apologize with tears in his eyes. A predator doesn't look at you with an expression of heartbreaking confusion. Please, I said, my voice gaining a little strength, fueled by a confusing mix of terror and burgeoning curiosity. Just leave. He shook his head slowly, not in defiance, but as if trying to clear it. The key, it worked, he murmured, more to himself than to me. He held up a single, old-fashioned brass key, the kind that came with the apartment. It still works. A new, different kind of chill went through me. How did he have a key? My key. The locks had been changed when I moved in 8 months ago. Mr. Henderson had assured me of that. Who are you? I asked, the question leaving my lips before I could stop it. I was still half naked, still terrified, but the sheer strangeness of the situation was creating a crack in my fear, a sliver through which logic and a desperate need for understanding were beginning to seep. He took a hesitant step forward, and I flinched back, banging my hip against the dresser. The pain was sharp and grounding. He stopped immediately, raising both hands in a gesture of surrender. "My name is Arthur," he said. "Arthur Daly." The name meant nothing to me. I shook my head, my arms tightening around myself. He looked around my room, his gaze sweeping over the framed posters of my favorite bands, the messy desk with my laptop and graphics tablet, the pile of clothes on the chair. His eyes lingered on the small, framed photograph on my nightstand, a picture of me and my parents at my college graduation. His expression was one of deep, gut-wrenching nostalgia. "This was my daughter's room," he said, his voice barely a whisper. The words landed in the silence between us, heavy and strange. "What are you talking about?" I said, my own voice trembling. "I've lived here for 8 months. Before that, it was a guy named Ben. The landlord told me." Arthur's shoulders slumped. He looked old, suddenly, and immeasurably tired. 20 years, he breathed out. "It's been 20 years. But it still looks, it still feels." He couldn't finish the sentence. A single tear escaped the corner of his eye and traced a path down his lined cheek. And in that moment, the last vestiges of my immediate, physical fear evaporated, replaced by a dawning, unsettling comprehension. This wasn't a home invasion. This was a ghost. "Your daughter?" I prompted softly, my grip on myself loosening slightly. He nodded, swallowing hard. "Her name was Lily. This was her room. We lived here. Our family. Me, my wife Eleanor, and Lily." He gestured vaguely towards the living room. "Her posters were right there." "Not those," he said, nodding at my modern art prints, "hers were of horses. She loved horses. And her desk was under this window. She'd do her homework there, with the sunset light just like this." I followed his gaze. My desk was indeed under the window. A cold prickle ran down my spine. Coincidence, surely, a commonplace for a desk. "What happened?" I asked, the question hanging in the air between us, fragile and dangerous. Arthur's face crumpled. He looked away, out the window, as if searching for the words in the fading light. "She got sick. Leukemia. She fought for 2 years. She was so brave, my Lily. So much braver than her old man." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "She passed away in this room. Right here. In this very space." The air left my lungs. The golden light suddenly felt cold. The cozy, familiar space of my bedroom felt alien, haunted by a grief I had never sensed. I had been sleeping, living, changing clothes in a room where a young girl had died. The thought was a profound violation, but not by the man in front of me. By life itself. I'm so sorry," I said, and I meant it. My own fears and my sense of violation were suddenly trivial, dwarfed by the monumental sorrow this man carried. "After she was gone," Arthur continued, his voice steadier now, as if telling the story was a relief, "we couldn't stay. Every corner of this apartment echoed with her absence. The silence was unbearable. We moved out a few months later. But before we left, I don't know why I did it. A moment of weakness, I suppose. I made a copy of the key. I couldn't bear the thought of never being able to come back to her room." He looked at the key in his hand as if seeing it for the first time. "For years, I never used it. It was just a comfort, a secret I kept. A tangible connection. I knew it was wrong. But I kept it in my old desk drawer. Then, about 5 years after we moved, I heard the building had been sold. New owners, new renovations. I assumed the locks would have been changed a dozen times over. I forgot about it. Life just goes on, even when you think it can't." He took a deep, shuddering breath. "My wife, Eleanor, she passed away last month. Ovarian cancer. We were married for 42 years. Losing Lily, it almost broke us, but we held on to each other. And now she's gone, too." The pieces were falling into a heartbreaking picture. A man, utterly alone, adrift on an ocean of grief, clutching at any flotsam from his past. "Today is Lily's birthday," he said, his voice cracking. "She would have been 34. I was going through some of Eleanor's things, and I found this key, tucked away in a small box with Lily's baby bracelet. And a madness came over me. I just had to know. I had to see if it would still work. I drove across town, fully expecting it not to fit. I was just going to stand outside the building, maybe. But the lock, it's the same. It's still the same." He looked at me, his eyes pleading for understanding. I am so terribly, deeply sorry. I never meant to frighten you. I never meant to invade your privacy. I was just a foolish old man chasing a ghost. The silence that followed was thick and heavy, but it was no longer filled with fear. It was filled with an immense, shared sadness. I looked at Arthur Daly, standing in the doorway of my bedroom, his daughter's bedroom, a man shattered by loss, and I felt my own anger and fear dissolve completely. Wait here, I said softly. I quickly pulled on the sweatshirt and a pair of sweatpants that were lying on my bed. My hands were trembling, but not from panic anymore. I walked past him, my bare feet quiet on the hardwood floor, and went into the kitchen. I filled a glass with water and brought it back to him. He took it with a grateful, shaky hand. Thank you, he whispered. Sit down, Arthur, I said, gesturing to the small armchair in the corner, the one currently holding my laundry. I quickly scooped the clothes onto the floor. Please. He sank into the chair like a marionette with its strings cut. I sat on the edge of my bed, facing him. We sat in silence for a few moments, the setting sun painting long, dramatic shadows across the room. Tell me about her, I said. He looked up, surprised. Tell me about Lily, I repeated. What was she like? A slow, fragile smile touched his lips. She was full of light, he began. She had this laugh that could make you forget any bad day. She loved animals, especially horses. We could never afford riding lessons, but she checked out every book about them from the library. She wanted to be a veterinarian. She was stubborn, too. Oh, so stubborn. When she was going through chemo, she never once complained. Not once. She was more worried about her mother and me. He talked for what felt like a long time. He told me about her favorite books, Black Beauty, of course her love for spaghetti, her fear of thunderstorms, and how she'd always draw smiling suns in the corner of her school notebooks. With every story, the ghost in the room became less of a spectral presence and more of a real person. A bright, beautiful life that had been tragically cut short. I found myself crying, silent tears tracking down my cheeks. I was crying for Lily, for Eleanor, for Arthur. I was crying for the sheer, brutal unfairness of it all. When his stories finally trailed off, the room was dark. The golden light had been replaced by the deep blue of twilight. I reached over and turned on my bedside lamp, casting a warm, soft glow over us. I should go, Arthur said, heaving himself out of the chair. He looked exhausted, but there was a new peace in his eyes, a quiet calm that hadn't been there before. I've taken up enough of your evening. And I've caused enough trouble. You haven't, I said, standing up as well. Really. We walked to the front door together. He paused with his hand on the knob. I won't be coming back, he said, his voice firm. This was what I needed. To say a proper goodbye, I think. To her room, to this part of our lives. He held out the brass key to me. Here, I shouldn't have this. I looked at the key, a simple piece of metal that held so much pain and love. Then I looked at his face, at the quiet resolution there. Keep it, I said. He stared at me, stunned. What? No, I couldn't. Keep it, I repeated. Not as a key to this apartment, but as a memento. A part of her, a part of your life with Eleanor. You don't need to come back here. You carry her with you. His eyes welled up with tears again, and he nodded, unable to speak. He closed his hand around the key, clutching it to his chest. Thank you, Chloe, he said, my name sounding strange and formal on his lips. For your kindness, for listening. Most people would have called the police. I'm glad I didn't, I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. He gave me one last, grateful look, then opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. I closed the door behind him, listening to the sound of his retreating footsteps until they faded into silence. I leaned my back against the door, sliding down until I was sitting on the floor, the cool wood pressing against my skin. The apartment was quiet again, but the silence was different. It was no longer empty. It was filled with the echo of a story, a life, a profound and devastating love. I thought about my own life. My complaints about my job, my worries about my career, my petty frustrations. They all seemed so small, so insignificant. Arthur's visit was an earthquake, shattering the walls of my self-involved world and forcing me to see the vast, painful, beautiful landscape of human experience that existed just beyond my own doorstep. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in my bed, in the space where a girl named Lily had once slept and dreamed of horses, and I thought about her. I thought about her courage, her light. I felt no fear, no sense of being haunted. Instead, I felt a strange, protective tenderness. I was now the temporary guardian of her memory in this space. The next day, I went to a local bookstore and found a beautiful, illustrated copy of Black Beauty. I brought it home and placed it on the small shelf above my desk. It wasn't a shrine, just a quiet acknowledgement. A way of saying, I remember you. A week later, I received a small, flat package in the mail. There was no return address, but the postmark was from a neighboring state. Inside, nestled in layers of tissue paper, was a watercolor painting. It was a simple, beautifully rendered image of a girl with long, brown hair, sitting on a windowsill and looking out at a sunset, much like the one that had been in my room that Tuesday. The light in the painting was exactly that same shade of gold. In the bottom corner, in a delicate script, were the words, "For Chloe, with endless gratitude, Arthur Daly." Tears filled my eyes as I looked at it. It was Lily. He had painted his daughter from memory, and he had given it to me. I had it framed and hung it on the wall opposite my bed, where I could see it every morning and every night. Arthur Daly never contacted me again. I don't know where he is now. But his unexpected, shocking intrusion into my life became one of the most defining moments of my own. He taught me that everyone is fighting a hard battle, that every person you meet is carrying a hidden weight of love and loss. He taught me that fear is often just a misunderstanding of another person's pain. And he taught me that sometimes, the most profound connections are made in the most bizarre and frightening of circumstances, when a door you thought was locked swings open, and instead of a monster, you find a broken-hearted father, and in helping him mend a piece of his past, you somehow mend a piece of your own future. My room is still my room. But it's also, in a way, Lily's room. And I'm okay with that. In fact, I think it's a privilege. The shock of that day wasn't the terror of an intruder, it was the stunning, humbling, life-altering power of a story. And that is a shock I will carry with me, gratefully, for the rest of my life.